In continuations with your theme 6, that is colonialism and the countryside, today we will explain the revolt in the countryside, the Bombay Deccan, and the Deccan Riots Commission, that is page 275. The revolts in the countryside, the Bombay Deccan. Why is there a revolt in the countryside? Who revolts? Against who? Okay, the peasants, they revolted against the British, so let's explore what was exactly happening in the countryside in this Bombay Deccan. And the colonial rule is known for dissatisfaction, miseries, poverty, that we can say that it was a bad day for the people, especially for these common people throughout this period. The lives of the peasants of the colonial Bengals and the Rajmahal Hills areas and of these Paharias and the Santals, they expressed their grievances against the colonial rule. Revolts were experienced and seen in the countryside and in Bombay Deccan, and also from time to time the rebels expressed their anger and this fury against this foreign exploiter, that is the British. And now we go to account books are burned. The main participants among the rebels were debtors. Debtors te hi lo nei tu re thei tak tak te khani leiba nei ho kha mo. Okay, chuan British ho laka khanin chia an choi ngai ni chia sang tak tak an choi ngai a an pe ka ngai a en ange lon rul tur an nei bok ani mo an eile in tur ngai tua ngai bok dik tak ro rel na om bok si lo nen kan thin rimin British ho kha an do wan be le ta ni chu oh so nge peasants thin rim khanin an leiba bu te kha an hal ta ni. Let's see here, okay. So they burned these account books and debt bonds, khatas, looted grain, looted these grain shops. This movement began at Supa, a large village in Pune, present-day Pune. They attacked the house of the Sahukar. Sahukar means moneylenders, and this revolt was spread to Ahmednagar as well. So at many places, the British officials and their policemen were also attacked. They attacked it, and at some places Riots also joined them because they could not pay the revenue in time, and they opposed this harsh method adopted by these companies officials. Okay, riots, R-I-O-T kan ti hian in ti buai na mo in 12 wak na ni ta chuan R-Y-O-T kan ti chuan Riots kan ti chuan Indian rama lo nei tu te lo nei mi ti na ni. Oh, and now we go to a farce revenue system. In 1820s, David Ricardo was an economist during the time of this British. Okay, Ricardo's ideas of this land ownership was introduced in the Bombay Deccan. Ricardo says that land owners should have a claim only to the average rent prevailed at a given time when the land was yield more than the average rent. The landowner had a surplus that the state need to tax. So the landowners were likely to spend the surplus income in improving lands. So because of this, the British introduced the Rohitwari system of land revenue in Bengal or Bombay Deccan, and in this system the British directly collected revenues from the Rohits or cultivators, and land were classified based on different types of soil, and proportions of it was fixed as revenue, and these land were resurveyed after every 30 years, and this unlikely the like the permanent settlement, this revenue demand were not fixed. And next is revenue demands and conditions of peasants' debts. The first revenue settlement in Bombay Deccan was made in 1820s. The revenue demand was so high that in many places people could not pay the revenue. So in many places, peasants they deserted their villages, and so it forced the peasants to migrate to a new regions. And if the peasants failed to pay the revenue, then his crops were seized and fine was imposed in them in the whole village. So in 1982, the problems became more severe and the price of this agricultural production fell sharply. And in between this 1832-34, famine struck these regions in which one-third of their cattle was killed. As life became difficult for the peasants, they began to borrow money from these moneylenders at a very high interest rate. It is says that if they borrow 100 rupees, the interest is around 2000, like that. So these peasants were having a hard time during those periods, okay? And most peasants failed to repay their borrowed money, so this increased their indebtedness and their economy was on the edge of this collapse. But then by the mid 1840 there was a sign of this economic recovery, and the British moderated their revenue demands to encourage these peasants to grow more crops. And let's go to this cotton and its global conditions, cotton boom. The American Civil War broke out in 1861, and due to this war, the cotton exports to Britain decreased to that extent. So to reduce dependence on American, cotton cultivation was promoted in India. Export merchants gave money to urban sahukar, who in turn gave to rural moneylenders to secure the produce. Okay, and so now the peasants has to access money easily, and due to this cotton production increased rapidly in India. But this brought prosperity to rich peasants, and mostly, and for small peasants it led to heavier debts. So by 1862, over 90% of these cotton imports into Britain were coming from this India. And when the Civil War ended in 1865, these exports of cotton resumed, and the price of cotton and the demands of cotton from India was decreased again. These merchants, hookers, and these moneylenders were not extending credits to these peasants, and instead they demanded repayment of their debts. And at the same time, revenue demand was also increased from this 50 to 100%. And next is experience injustice of the peasants. Peasants got deeper and deeper into debts. Leban nga tuwal ani. And now they heavily dependent on money lenders for survival. But now these money lenders were refusing their loans. They don't want to give loans anymore. And along with this, and there was a customary rule that interest charge cannot be more than principal amounts of their loan. But in the colonial rule, this law was broken, and now riots started to see moneylenders as devious or deceitful, and they started complaining of these moneylenders manipulating laws and forging accounts. So, in order to tackle this problem, the British in 1859 passed limitation law that started the loan bond would have validity for 3 years only, and this limitation law was meant to check accumulations of interest. But these money lenders now forced this riot to sign a new bond every 3 years, in which this total unpaid balance of last loan was entered as principal amount and the interest was charged on it. It must be very tough, isn't it? And in petitions to Deccan Riots Commission, riots state that how moneylenders were suppressing and oppressing them by refusing to give this receipt when loans were paid back. and enter these fictitious figures in the bones, and they were forced to sign and put this thumb impression on the bones, in which these peasants had no idea, and they, as they could not read and write. And the moneylenders also acquired the heaviest at low price and ultimately took over the property of these peasants. Even these moneylenders had no choice, because to survive they needed. And next is the Deccan Riots Commissions and its reports. The government of Bombay set up a commissions to investigate riots in Deccan, and the commissions held inquiry in the district where riots spread. They recorded the statements of riots, sahukars, and eyewitness, and the compiled data on the revenue rates, and they recorded interest rate in different regions and collected reports sent by these district collectors. And these reports of this commission was tabled in the British Parliament in 1878. This report reflected the official thinkings of this colonial government, and it came to one of the conclusion that peasants were angered by these moneylenders, not by the revenue demands of the company. It shows that the colonial government was reluctant to admit that popular discontent was against these government actions. And lastly, let's see the causes. The Bombay Deccan peasants how revolt chan. Let's see here. British how laka anhel chan ka kanzirli ang atop natan. The peasants rise or revolt against what they perceive to be injustice and the causes of this of their suffering. The traders or the grain dealers, this is point number 2, are also considered responsible for their revolt, because these traders and grain dealers did not believe in fair deal, and they used to exploit the adverse economic situations of the riots and debtors. And these shopkeepers used to change the records of the account books dishonestly, means the shopkeepers were cheating them and lying in their own favor. Okay. And point number 3, the British officials took seriously the rebels, their activities and their efforts to take law in their own hands. So in order to frighten the rebellious peasants, these police outposts were established in village in order that the peasants would submit themselves to the British. Okay. And point number 4 is, according to some historians, a new revenue system was also responsible for these revolts in Bombay Deccan. As the British rule expanded from Bengal to other parts of India, new system of this revenue were imposed. The permanent settlement was rarely extended to any regions beyond this Bengal. In short, we can say that the Rohitwari system was introduced in Bombay Deccan. In this, in place of these jamindars and this exploiter, there was taken directly by this company itself. This revenue was collected directly by this company itself. Okay, so in territories annexed in the 19th century, temporary revenue settlement were made, and the farmers had to pay nearly more than 50% of their total agricultural produce. So the burdens of this revenue amount was very high. So because of all these reasons, the peasants revolted against the British. Okay, kati zong ka voina kan explain the ania chapter ni kan laba ka ti chuan hemi chapter ami tho hi homework a khanin question 1 to 5 kha kapeto chewa chuan voina chuan question 6 to atop thleng 10 thleng kha in lo by hat vek don ya. Thank you all.